Hi, my name is Sushmit Ghosh, and I am the co-director, producer, editor, cinematographer of Writing with Fire, a story about a team of Dalit women journalists from India who are speaking truth to power.
आप लोगों को जानकारी कौन सी चाहिए?
हमें सारी जानकारी चाहिए जो इस रास्ते से लेकर के दिक्कतें होती हैं।
हमको ये बताइए पहले पत्रकार कौन से हैं? चैनल वाले हैं?
खबर लहरिया से है।
चैनल वाले हैं?
मैं आपको बताऊँ, खबर लहरिया से है, वो पेपर भी है और चैनल भी है। तो जो चैनल है वो आपको यूट्यूब में मिलेगा और जो पेपर है वो आपको साप्ताहिक मिलेगा।
अच्छा
जी।
आपकी मांग नहीं है कि आपको यहाँ आने के लिए न्यूज़ अगर बनानी है तो आपको गाड़ी चलनी चाहिए, आपकी मांग नहीं है ये?
नहीं, मेरी नहीं है क्योंकि मैं तो अक्सर पैदल चलती
निकल
हूँ।
जाइए फिर।
ओके,
आपकी आवश्यकता नहीं फिर हमको।
हाँ तो ठीक है।
जब आपको
मुझे
ये
आ
जरूरत नहीं
सुनिए,
है कि यहाँ पे या कोई यहाँ एक अनपढ़ व्यक्ति भी नहीं है बोलेगा कि आप पैदल चलने वाले हैं। मीडिया जो है ना बाइक देती है, मोबाइल देती है,
ऐसा कहीं कुछ नहीं होता।
गाड़ी के लिए किराया देती है,
आप किसी भी,
खाने पीने का खर्चा देती है।
आप मीडिया के अंदर जाने के पता है आपको क्या रूल होते हैं, क्या नियम कानून होते हैं?
इसलिए हमसे उतनी ही बात करी जितना समझ में आए, इससे ओवर नहीं। और हमारी डिमांड केवल एक है कि इसको बीच वाले पेज नहीं छापने, यहाँ जो इसको मेन पेज पे।
तो मैं आपको एक चीज बता दूं, जो आप कह रहे हैं, जो
अब
आप
आप बोलेंगे मेन पेज का खर्चा लगता है।
बिल्कुल नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं, क्योंकि जो खबर लिखनी होती है उसमें पैसा नहीं लगता है, पैसा आप लोग लेते होंगे। मैं वही बोल रही हूँ कि आपको लगता होगा ना, मुझे नहीं लगता है। मेन फ्रंट पेज पे छापने के लिए मुझे कोई पैसा नहीं देना पड़ता है, मुझे तो सिर्फ खबर देनी पड़ती है कि वो खबर लगाने लायक है फ्रंट पे या नहीं है।
This is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week, I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. This week, it is my pleasure to welcome the award-winning filmmaker, Sushmit Ghosh. His film, Writing with Fire, has been shortlisted for an Academy Award and tells the inspiring story of India's only newspaper run by Dalit, low-caste women. Armed with smartphones, wit, and tenacity, chief reporter Meera and her journalists break traditions as they break stories and tackle India's biggest issues. In the process, they are redefining what it means to be powerful. Sushmit, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Oh, thanks, Matthew, for having me, and looking forward to this chat. It's been a busy time, but it's been an interesting time.
I imagine it has been an interesting time. The film we're talking about is Writing with Fire, shortlisted for an Academy Award, Audience Award, and Special Jury Prize at Sundance, among many other awards at the festival circuit. So thanks so much for joining us on, I know this is a national holiday in India, so it's Republic Day, which is very poignant, especially, it's all by coincidence on our end, but it's much appreciated that you're spending some of your Republic Day with us, and congratulations on the Academy Award nomination. I mean, what was it like to receive that call?
Oh, well, it's an interesting story. So Rintu and I were flying in from London. We'd just finished our campaigning, and this was the night when the shortlist was going to be announced. We landed on the tarmac in Delhi, I think about 2:30 in the morning, and Rintu switched on her phone and let out a little shriek. And and all the other passengers on our side of the plane were just like, "Is everything okay?" And she just, "Oh no, everything's fine." And then word went out that an Indian documentary was on the shortlist, and people were like clapping, and strangers were whistling. So that's how we brought the news in. But it's phenomenal. It's great to be an independent film on the shortlist. Yeah.
And your feature debut. I mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely amazing. And I understand why, having seen the film. I mean, for those of our listeners and viewers who haven't, maybe you can get us a little synopsis. You've already kind of done it, quick, certainly a log line at the beginning, but what is Writing with Fire all about?
Writing with Fire is the story of Khabar Laharia, which literally translates into waves of news, which is a newsroom that is run entirely by women, and most of them women from the Dalit community. And we caught them at a time where they were transitioning from 14 years of print to digital. And we were drawn to the story essentially because we were curious to see how they were going to make this transition, fundamentally because they were operating in a region that is known for notorious levels of violence against the Dalit community, against women. And just to be a Dalit woman journalist in these parts of India, operating in media dark spaces, was a story that was just waiting to be told. And the film essentially follows three reporters in the newsroom, and Meera, who's the central protagonist of the film, and two journalists that she's essentially mentoring. And over the course of 5 years that we put this film together, we see not only them transition in their personal lives, but also in their professional lives. We see the growth of Khabar Laharia as essentially a force in the newsmaking space in India. And we also see India in an interesting way transition as a democracy. So it's telling a lot of stories in an interconnected way.
Indeed. And maybe for, I think a decent number of listeners may not, just maybe pull back just a bit. Maybe, I think a lot of our listeners may not know that much about Dalits and what that means in terms of the context of India and culture. Maybe you can give us a little background on these women that we see in this film.
Sure. So India has or had, okay, let me rephrase this. So there is the caste system that many people have heard of. And according to the Hindu scriptures, very basically, humans can be divided into four key castes, and it's sort of like a pyramid hierarchy. And each of these four castes have multiple subcastes. And the Dalit community is considered, quote unquote, so impure that they have historically always been kept out of the caste system and essentially have borne the brunt of, or the legacy, or essentially the violence of what it means being outsiders to the caste system. And while India gained independence, the practice of caste-based practices were banned constitutionally. But it's sometimes difficult to get rid of a social structure that has been around for nearly 3,000 years.
Right.
And so if you're from the Dalit community, you would be someone who has historically always been marginalized, always been oppressed, would not necessarily have access to resources that most other Indians would have, whether that be education or healthcare. And you see a lot of that in the film as these reporters go into these media dark villages, spaces that are not covered by the mainstream, where people don't have access to clean drinking water, toilets, healthcare facilities, schools, electricity. And the work that these women are doing is essentially ensuring equity and justice for people across the spectrum in the country. So,
yeah. Well, I think that brings us to a good point because your film also talks about, maybe we can talk about the societal challenges these women face. So you've already alluded to it, but we are talking about the world's largest democracy. You've had Indira Gandhi, so you've had a woman as head of the country, but very much still, and especially where they're based, male-dominated media, male-dominated industry and crime and society, and you also have this rise of increasingly this rise of right-wing extremism. So they face so many challenges on so many fronts, don't they?
Absolutely. I think India is also a bit of a paradox, one of the first democracies in the world to elect a woman prime minister. Uttar Pradesh, the state where these women operate, just for context, is the largest state in India in terms of population. If it was a country, it would be the fifth largest country in the world.
Wow.
It's a complicated geography. And incidentally, Uttar Pradesh, till not too long ago, had a woman chief minister who was a Dalit woman. So,
I remember that.
Yeah, Mayawati. And so it's a bag of many things, but you're right, Matthew, that the fact that if you're a Dalit woman in these parts of the country, especially in the belt where we have filmed in southern Uttar Pradesh, the very act of stepping out of your home is an act of courage. The fact that you have Dalit women who have decided to take on the role of journalists in these spaces where most mainstream male, quote unquote, again, upper caste men fear to tread is quite something in itself. And I think what was pivotal in the journey of this newsroom was the fact that while they had existed for 14 years as a newspaper, they were known within a smaller region or a smaller geography because they were doing 5,000 runs of the newspaper every 2 weeks, and according to their own studies they were hitting a readership of roughly 15,000 people. And usually mostly people who were reading their newspaper were men, because women or young girls would not be allowed to complete their schooling. So I think when Meera, who's the central protagonist of our film, decided to lead this change, one of the things that she was benching her hopes on was to be able to diversify the readership, or in this case, the viewership of news, and ride on this demographic dividend of access to technology, which most Indians now have. So, we've said this so many times, and we've actually witnessed this on the ground, that a house might not have a toilet or electricity, but they will definitely have a small, cheap Chinese smartphone and access to cheap 3G, 4G services. And that's the pivot that Meera wanted to make, where their news was seen by more people. And because they're on these digital platforms like YouTube and Facebook, they're also able to sort of measure the metrics. How many people are watching the news? When are they dropping out? How many women are watching it? What is the age bracket that's consuming the news? And had explosive growth, and they've been able to sort of use these metrics to essentially inform themselves on what's working and what's not. But the fact that Dalit women are doing what they're doing in itself is quite something, because a model like this doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. And what also drew us in was the fact that this wasn't just a social experiment. They had existed as professional journalists for 14 years. So we knew that this shift was going to lead to something tangible. And the success or the failure of the newspaper itself was sort of like a Trojan horse for us. We wanted to dive into the lives of these three women and actually tell you the story from inside their worlds and what it means being a woman, challenging these systems of oppression and patriarchy and navigating through these very hostile spaces.
Well, let's talk about these three women. And even before we do that, I mean, even just that newsroom, the staff, these are some of the most inspirational characters I can remember from recent memory. And also, I mean, what it struck me is their faces. I mean, they're going through, they're, as you say, we've got this historical legacies, what their lives are like, but their faces are actually aglow. I mean, these women are they just exude beauty in confidence, and you can see them even grow, some of them in confidence. But let's talk about Meera. I guess she's now bureau chief. I mean, what's her average day like? I mean, she's bureau chief of this newspaper that's exploding on terms of digital platforms, but see lots of late night train trips home. She's still got to take care of the kids and the housework. I mean, what is it like for Meera?
Oh my God! I mean, it's how do I put this? We were working 18-hour shifts with her, and that was an average. Her days would start at about 5 in the morning, leaving home about 5:36, going into the field, the back of beyond, train journeys, followed by bus journeys, followed by rickshaw rides, and then just the act of walking, because a lot of these spaces that they were going into did not exist on Google Maps. Did not exist on any physical maps. So it's essentially asking people, where is this village? And, in India, a lot of times many villages sound similar. So landing up in the wrong village and then directing yourself. And operating in geographies where average temperatures are about 40 degrees Celsius, for a given. And because this is also sort of like the mining belt of the country, so extremely dusty as well. And so working in the field, reporting, and then making the long journey back home, coming back home 8, 9, sometimes 10 at night, and filing the stories that you have done. But between all of this, also managing a team of nearly 25 reporters in the field who are constantly calling in with something or the other that's going wrong in terms of either access or their own stories or technology. And managing a home, 2 daughters and a husband, and just the burden of expectations that we have from our mothers and our sisters, that you could be a working woman, but you are still expected to come back home and take care of the house.
Right.
So I think that's something that we also wanted to allude to in the film, where if you see Meera's graph, she's someone who's very anchored. She's someone, as you say, who's full of. She exudes a certain quiet power. There is something about her that there is very elegant and graceful, and yet she's able to sort of keep the shop together. And I think the fact that she's able to do it and dance these dances so gracefully is something that we wanted to sort of string into the film. That it's not just the story of a journalist who's managing an institution that may or may not grow, but it's essentially the story of a mother and a wife and a daughter, and the guilt that women also have to bear in making choices on a day-to-day basis. So while it's about the big story, it's also about those little nuanced conversations that happen inside the house with the daughter or with the husband. Right. And that's what the stitching on the edit was all about.
It's excellent. And I think you were talking about her quiet power. I mean, there's her just marching into the police station and, there's confronting them about some of these horrific stories that they're breaking. Absolutely amazing. I mean, that's right up there with the most confident leading journalists you would see anywhere. It's quite impressive. And then you mentioned the mining belt, and that brings us, I guess, to Sunita, who's another lovely character that we get to meet, exposing these horrific conditions that are straight out of hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. Yet she has her own family pressures to deal with that we learn about in the film. Could you say a few things about Sunita?
So when, a little anecdote sort of pulling back, so how we met all three of them, Sunita, Meera, and Shyamkali, is in this meeting, right, almost in the beginning of the film, where Meera is pitching to the entire team the urgency to shift to digital. Right. And it was a meeting that lasted for nearly 4 hours, and about 28 women reporters sitting and debating and discussing, and the energy in the room was just very infectious. And Sunita stood out because she was the youngest reporter in the team. She had a baby face, but she was constantly challenging the entire leadership, because she was someone who was a cub reporter, homegrown in the art of reporting, and she'd fallen in love with the physical edition of the newspaper, and in a sense did not want to transition to digital. And she had a lot of questions about how we're going to do this, because for instance, if I were to go into the field and interview someone who's just lost a child, it's easy for me to do that in print, but would they consent to actually have their face in my video reportage? And they were having these nuanced conversations about ethics and consent and character strands, and I think Sunita stood out for us because of the energy levels that she brought, and the fact that she was an absolute maverick, sort of a shooting star. And we were interested in seeing, here is a lot of potential. How is Meera going to hone this energy in, and will she be able to craft Sunita into a next level leader? And that's essentially what our hook point with Sunita was. And as we stayed longer with her, layers of her own personal story began to unravel for us. Her own life, where she lives, her own personal history, which is interconnected with the mine next to the village she lives, sort of like gives you a sense of why she does what she does and the purpose with which she works. So Sunita was an automatic and an immediate choice for us. Like, we instinctively knew that she had to be someone profile in the film.
And for someone who was maybe a little bit resistant about making the move to digital, she's an absolute natural. I mean,
Absolute star. Yeah.
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 And then Shyamkali, I mean, that's probably kind of comes out quietly and then rises to the front. You know, she's someone who has not been even had access to a smartphone previously. I mean, I guess she's representative of a lot of the women that they bring in and who do the reporting.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why we decided to have her in the film, we always imagined the film with three characters. It's sort of like complete this pyramid structure. And Shyamkali, in a sense, represented this fear of embracing something new and the unknown. And also brought in this sense of ironic humor. Like, here is a young woman in the 21st century who's scared to touch a phone because she feels that she should not be, and it is not in her space to do that.
Right.
And then the agency that she has eventually through the course of the film, as she's trained by her, the group of sisters that she's with, and to eventually go on to her breakthrough case, demonstrating, the ethics, the compassion, and really the sophistication of an investigative reporter. Some of the best that you'd find in the world to break a case that leads to action and leads to clear consequences. And now Shyamkali is someone who's a senior reporter in the organization. The best. They have these monthly awards, and she consistently knocked out the award for best camera woman. So she's doing really, really well. She continues to remain a reticent, shy, sort of like a lone wolf, but she pulls off some great stories and doing really well. Yes.
Oh, excellent. Hey, I think that takes us to a good point for a break for our audience. So we'll be right back with Sushmit Ghosh, the director, producer, and editor and cinematographer, among many other things, I'm sure, of Writing with Fire, shortlisted for an Academy Award.
श्यामकली जी क्या नहीं आ रहा?
उसी में है, जैसे हम वही मोबाइल को खोलते हैं, ऑप्शन आते हैं, तो उसमें कि किस चीज़ को मतलब दबाना है तो वो आएगा, फिर हम वो ईमेल डालना। तो ये आप पूरा आ ही नहीं रहा, इंग्लिश और वो जो हिंदी में बताया गया।
ये वाला है, ये है, ये नहीं है। फिर आई ये वाली, ये बिंदी जो लगी है, डंडा लगा है।
अभी एक बार बनाई थी जब गलत हो गया।
अब तुम डॉट लगाओ, ठीक है?
और ये कहे एक तन के सब अच्छा रहे।
हाँ, तो वो तुम्हें ढूंढना। आप जो है ना, चलो मैं इंग्लिश, जिनको इंग्लिश के अक्षर नहीं पहचानना आता है, उनको 1 घंटे की पढ़ाई करनी। इसको बोलेंगे क्या, वो भी मैं लिखती जा रही हूँ। हाँ, पूरी लिखना है।
If you enjoy Factual America, check out the Movie Maker podcast. That's all one word, Movie Maker, where our friends at moviemaker.com interview everyone from filmmakers just breaking in to A-listers like David Fincher and Edgar Wright about their movie-making secrets and behind-the-scenes tricks of the trade. They go deep and let the guests speak uninterrupted to get you the most film insight. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with award-winning filmmaker Sushmit Ghosh. The film is Writing with Fire, shortlisted for an Academy Award, winner of audience and special jury awards at Sundance and many other film festival awards. Actually, Sushmit, are people able to watch this anywhere yet? Is it streaming or anywhere? Or is that something that's in process?
So essentially, it's going to be on Independent Lens in March. Okay. And it is going to be broadcast in a bunch of places, depending on which part of the world you're sitting in. So it is going to be on public television in many parts of Europe. It's on BBC as well.
Okay.
We are hoping that I think March is when you will be able to watch the film. And of course, with the broadcast comes access to the broadcaster's own streaming services. But the film is not on one single platform where you can click and yeah.
Okay. All right. So watch this space, everyone. Do watch it though when you get a chance. I'm actually going to watch it again when I get a chance because I've only had a chance to. Well, I've watched a couple scenes twice actually, but we were talking before the break, and I think we even already mentioned this, but this film also captures what is happening in India. So at the moment, and I think there's a very poignant scene, and we're going to maybe even talk more about it, or we can even talk about it now. Just this scene where I think there's a staff meeting, but there's a lot of what do the staffers at the newspaper feel about all this change? I mean, do they find it threatening? Do they find it? Maybe you could give us a little insights on that.
I think it's something as journalists they were clued into. When you have your feet and ears on the ground, you begin to expect what the future holds for you, and you're able to read the signs. And it's something that we've been witnessing globally as well with the rise of populist governments and how big data companies working in collusion with these sophisticated boutique agencies have been able to bring to power personality cults, right, across the world, whether that be the Philippines or Turkey or, fortunately for you, what seemed to be 4 years under Trump gone now. They knew that, it wasn't going to be easy, but these are conversations that we always had with them. And, Meera actually once commented, and what she had to say was really interesting. She said, listen, guys, you folks come from the cities, right? And we as Dalit women have always had to face, and for us, our resistance was always built into these systems of oppression. So this is not something new, but because this is now flowing out from the tiny villages into the towns and now coming into the cities, you feel anxious about what's going to happen. But we've always seen this, and we've actually been at the bottom of the system, so to speak, bearing the weight of all of this. So it's not new. And so our job as journalists essentially is to filter the news and continue to present it the way it should. And I also think it speaks to the fact that, this whole idea of what is news really, because the way that the fourth estate, in a sense, can also be blamed for the rise of populism across the world, where the fourth estate now is hand in glove with corporations, where the meaning of news essentially, news is being designed by a small set of people making editorial decisions on behalf of millions. And it's not very different in India. Just statistically speaking, according to a recent survey, nearly 94% of all major broadsheets and news channels in India, the editorial positions are high caste men who are deciding what news is. And in the Editors Guild of India, there is only one Dalit reporter, and it's a reporter from Khabar Lahariya, which speaks to the relevance of this newsroom. So while they are a small newsroom, they are much recognized for what they're doing. And I think it also speaks to the courage of these women for continuing to do what they're doing despite the times and the circumstances that they are in. So,
well, I mean, as I think the film points out, I think it's towards the end that journalists are it's not without its dangers. It's a dangerous profession, and across the world, but especially in India as well. And I mean, with you guys, so you're following them around. Did you ever feel like you were under threat? Because they're going into, they're exploring things that the mafia's doing. They're, I don't think they pull their punches with anyone. Any politicians who's not doing what they should be doing, they will report on it. It doesn't have to be a particular party. So did you ever feel like, you were in a dangerous position yourselves as filmmakers.
In retrospect, like when we've been talking about the film and the spaces that we went into film, we did go into some dangerous spaces, but like the bus was moving so fast, you either jump on or not. And once you throw into it, you're just filming. And I think that, yeah, we were filming. This was, I think, the first time that Rintu and I and Karan, who was a co-cinematographer, we filmed all across India in the rural heartlands across the country. And we, in a sense, had an understanding of what India was like, and not the India that you see as the India shining, but the real India in the heartlands. But this was the first time where we collectively experienced so much trauma around us of the violence that is in the air, where you see physically, which manifests in the forms of dead bodies brutalized in front of you, but also the palpable danger that's there in the air. So, for instance, there are scenes where Sunita and Meera are out late at night and walking through these dark alleyways, and the only thing that's helping them navigate these spaces is the torch on their mobile phone and nobody else, right? And we were going through spaces that women are constantly picked up, kidnapped, raped, murdered. So that's something that sort of was in our minds. But the fact that we were making a film on these journalists who knew how to navigate and negotiate through these spaces so well, I don't think we really dwelled on it too much. It's only after we came back and started sifting through the footage and the edit, and because we'd filmed for 4 years, when we went back to the earlier footage, we were just like, whoa, we ended up filming all of this. This is crazy. So that's what happened. I think it was all retrospective.
One thing that struck me is that the film actually, there's a slight turn in the tale. Probably one that you did or didn't expect, with the BJP winning the Uttar Pradesh state elections, and there's that big meeting they have, and they talk about Meera's talking about how they're going to have to. The reporting's got to become more nuanced. Small group of them is going to be doing the critical stories, and I think she ends by saying someone says we must be vigilant. And then the next scene, you go from vigilant to vigilante. And but what I found that interesting is that she interviews Satyam, and he's this upcoming leader of this vigilante group, and yet he becomes a bit of a character in this film as well. And that was an interesting turn, sort of halfway in. Was that conscious? I mean, what were you guys thinking with bringing him into the story?
Happened out of the blue completely. And it actually happened when I look back halfway through the filming. Exactly. 2 years into the filming, this happened. And strangely enough, we dropped it into the film at the 45-minute mark, halfway through the film as well. We didn't expect Satyam to jostle for space with Meera, Sunita, and Shyamkali. But we knew that he was going to become an important character in the film, essentially because I feel that he, in a sense, represents also, this shade of gray that we see in our societies. Don't get me wrong; he's someone who's quite an affable character off camera. We used to crack jokes with him, had a lot of fun. He invited us home. We spent a lot of time with him. But we were looking at Satyam's story through Meera's eyes, and our question to her always was, what compels you? Despite all the stories that you're doing, this is a long-form investigative piece that you're doing, because she went back time and again to Satyam and she filed like a series of stories about him over a year. And she said, Satyam for me represents the future of this country, the future of the youth of this country, and the choices that they are making. And in a sense, that became sort of the anchor point for us as well, that Satyam being Satyam is not just a vigilante, so to speak. He's a young man who lost his way, and the choices that we all have. And for us, it was interesting to also sort of counterbalance. So Meera said something very beautiful that didn't make it to the final cut of the film, where she said that all kinds of people will have all kinds of choices. But when I look at young people, on the one hand, you have someone like Satyam, and on the other hand, you have someone like Sunita, and they both
Right.
had to make the choices. But look at the paths that they took, and I'm interested in seeing what choices more young people will make over the course of the next few years. And I think that was something that beautifully set up Satyam's arc as well in the film. He also represents this sort of this force of technology as well. In one particular scene, he very gently alludes to the fact that he's able to bring together people using WhatsApp, and
Right.
WhatsApp has become sort of like a tool for fake news in India. WhatsApp has become a great proponent of sort of galvanizing literally forces on the ground, feet on the ground. And so on the one hand, you have the women in the news institution doing what they're doing with technology. On the other hand, you have this other set of folks with swords in their hands protecting their idea and notion of what India should be. This whole idea of a pure nation.
Right.
And what does that really mean? And how is technology galvanized? And so, these questions around future and democracy, technology, all sort of get underpinned in Satyam's own arc, so to speak.
Well, it's all there, all beautifully done and put together, and it's definitely it's a piece of art, piece of cinema that I highly recommend that everyone go watch when they have a chance. You mentioned earlier. You guys have been, I think you were on 5 years or so on the case, but how did this project come about? How did you all get involved? Was it merely you came across this this newspaper and so this would be something that could be a good doc? How did that come about?
Strangely, on the internet, we saw a photo story pop up on our Facebook timelines of a woman delivering newspapers in this very arid landscape, and she was wearing this colorful sari. And when we found out more, we discovered the work of the newspaper and the fact that they'd been around for 14 years. So they weren't just a social experiment. So we knew that there was already some gravitas and meat over there.
Yeah.
It's when we reached out to them and met them where we essentially began to have conversations around wanting to make a feature-length film on them, that we realized that they were going to shift to digital. And we knew that something interesting would happen, because you're looking at, the archaic traditions of the caste system and how brutal and oppressive and ancient and primitive it is. And on the other hand, you have the new force of technology that's contained in a smartphone in the hands of a Dalit woman who's basically bearing the weight of both of these worlds. And I think that was a very natural entry point for us, because we were curious to see how would Meera and her team, philosophically speaking, manage between both of these forces, or would one end up crushing the other? That could have also possibly been an outcome, which thankfully it wasn't.
Yeah. And then so you just approached them and they said yes, and you just got the cameras rolling and let what happened.
They were curious, actually, to be honest. They had a lot of shots made on them. So they were aware of what a film crew does.
Right.
But they weren't very sure of what a feature documentary looked like. So they asked us questions about how long is this going to take? And what is your lens? What's your angle? As Meera very...
That's a great scene, yeah.
Yeah, well, Meera explains to Shyamkali in the film what an angle is. So they were like, what's your angle? So they had already seen our body of work, and in a sense, they knew what our lens was. And, our interest always has been about amplifying stories about protagonists who are literally on the margins, who most people would not know of, who have created tectonic shifts within their communities, whether that be agriculture, climate change, maternal health, refugee rights. So they automatically fit into our own interest areas of folks we like to work with. And I think what essentially happened was that when they invited us over for this first meeting, and I think that's where we got really lucky because we were able to film this meeting that was a pivotal shift and a moment, not only in the film, but in the history of the newspaper. And the 7 days that we spent with them, they ended up watching us film them. And our approach was very minimal. There were three of us on the ground. We
Okay.
decided to go in with DSLRs and not, the bigger cameras, not the C300s, not the prime lenses, not the cine lenses.
Yeah.
There was no sound recorders, so Rintu doubled up as a sound person. There were no boom mics. At all levels, our approach was be as non-intrusive as possible, and just that classic. Um, if you were to be a fly on the wall, what
Yeah.
would it
Yeah.
look?
Yeah.
And I think that it's that choreography that allowed them to trust our process because we never interfered with their work. And we weren't whipping out our cameras whenever there was a moment to shoot. And there were a lot of moments to shoot, but we would always wait for the journalists to make the first move. And I think that's sort of like the process that we set up, which they trusted, and that allowed us to enter their own inner worlds, sanctum sanctorum, so to speak. And that's where we began to film from within their lives, so to speak. So yeah.
Well, it's met with your film's met with an incredible reception. Did you ever imagine you would make a splash like this?
So, we ended up spending 5 years making this film, but also pitching it in different forums internationally.
Yeah.
And everywhere we would pitch, people would walk up to us and say, hey, listen, is there a link where I could just donate something to the journalist,
Well,
some money?
Yeah.
And so we knew that this was a story that was emotionally drawing in an audience, even at a pitch level. And we knew that this was a story we wanted to craft in a way that was as universal as it was Indian. So it could not lose its Indian identity. It couldn't be too simple for an Indian audience. Because an Indian audience, in a sense, understands the nuances of caste. And you don't need to say a lot.
Right.
But we didn't want it to be too overcomplicated for an international audience. And so that's how we stitched the story together. And in a sense, both of us knew that the story would play well, but we did not we did not imagine the reception that it would get. Playing in nearly 120 festivals in just 12 months across the world is quite something. And I think what's overwhelmed us has been the fact that, COVID has pushed most filmmakers to do this virtually and digitally. But what it's also led to has been, in a weird way, a democratization of also the film watching experience, because when it played at Sundance, it wasn't just, certain kind of a crowd that was going to Sundance to watch the film. Sundance opened it up pan US. And so 10,000 people on the first two screenings watched Writing with Fire. And we had these notes coming in on Instagram, on Facebook, about how there was a police officer who ended up watching the film with his two daughters, and he mailed in saying, I love Sunita. She could be like a cop. Like, she's so cool, and my daughters love her, and from all across. And I think that kind of love that this narrative galvanized, I feel happened essentially because the film became more accessible in a sense. And, but yeah, this is something we were hoping for. That we would be able to present this film to as many audiences across as many spaces. It's been a bit debilitating sort of managing distribution because the world of distribution became so complex because of the pandemic. But we have been finding ways and opportunities of presenting this film and bringing the journalists with us into different forums, whether that be pure journalistic or film schools or other spaces. So fingers crossed, 2022 might be an interesting year as well, because we are embarking on an impact run with the film, and there's a lot of excitement around it. So,
understandably, and wish you luck with all that. And I think you mentioned, we'll put some links in the show notes, I'm sure, to, like you said, if people want to get in touch or even donate to these what these women are doing. And one last question regarding this: are you going to, if you get if you're one of the final nominees, you flying to LA? You going to go to the Oscars?
Oh, I would love to have Meera, Sunita, and Shyamkali walk the
Wouldn't
red
that
carpet in their saris
that
with
would
their
be
phones.
amazing? Yeah,
That would be.
exactly.
They have the speeches ready. Yeah.
And live reporting, I'm sure.
That's what they're going to do. So,
Yes.
we were able to sort of have Meera with us at ITFA in Amsterdam
Okay.
briefly, while she was able to present the film with us in person to a live audience. And people fell in love with her. And she was constantly recording everything and sending it back to India. This was the first time she was traveling outside the country. So I think I think people across the world also need to witness another prototype of an Indian woman. Stories out of India so far, especially when they've been seen from a Western lens, have been a certain kind of a narrative. And I think one of the reasons why this story is also picked up so well has been because people are witnessing a very different kind of power. They're witnessing the power of Dalit women journalists who are actually not speaking for just their community, but are holding the pillars of the fourth estate strong, which is something that needs to be mirrored across the world. And I feel that one of the things that people feel galvanized, or one of the reasons they feel galvanized, is because you see protagonists you don't expect to do this. People who have historically been oppressed,
Yeah.
picking themselves up and fighting for us. So, with all our privilege, what complaints do we have living in this fractured world to not make it a better space? And I
Yeah.
think more people need to um, witness this part. So, it's very. That would be the dream if the film were to be shown. I think that would get so much to the news agency, but also to journalists across the world. The fact that two
Yeah.
actually won the Nobel Peace Prize speaks to the relevance of the fourth estate right now in the moment where we are, anywhere in the world.
Yeah. And I think as the at the very least, as the Washington Post, I think, put it, it's probably possibly the greatest journalist movie ever made, at least in their estimation. So, yeah, I think it's. I wish you luck. I hope you are one of the final nominees. We've been fortunate to have a few of the preliminary nominees on this podcast, so it's been great getting to talk with you and just discuss this film. I mean, one last question, if we may, because I know we're coming up on the end of our time together. But well, what's next for you and Runit? I mean, I know you said the impact round, but where do you go from here?
I think I'm going to vegetate for a month after all of this. So we are developing a couple of stories. One of them was a documentary, but because of the lockdown, we couldn't go in for our research. But the more we've been thinking about it, it actually lends itself more into a hybrid, almost a narrative piece. And it's a form that we are very excited about. So it's a story that we want to dive into this year. And there's another story that we're doing with a streamer. It's an episodic series about a little school in a coastal belt in India. That's all I can say, but we are very excited about it, essentially because it's an observational story about young children with big hopes and dreams. And another film that I think, another series that I think the world needs to bear witness to. So fingers crossed on that.
Well, we look forward to seeing both those projects when they come to fruition. So, just want to give a big thanks to Sushmit Ghosh for spending part of his Republic Day with us. I know that's very poignant for us, and there's a very poignant scene in the film that takes place on Republic Day. So, very much appreciated. Just to remind our listeners, we've been talking with the award-winning director, producer, cinematographer, editor of Writing with Fire, Sushmit Ghosh. The film is been shortlisted for an Academy Award and also won an Audience Award and Special Jury Awards at Sundance and a host of other awards across the festival circuit. I'd like to give a shout-out to Sam and Joe Graves at Intersound Audio in Eskrick, England, in deepest, darkest Yorkshire. A big thanks to Nevin Apaunovich, podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show. And finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas. You can reach out to us on YouTube, social media, or directly by going to our website, www.factualamerica.com, and clicking on the Get in Touch link. And as always, please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.